GOP leaders in the Senate today squashed a Venezuela war powers resolution after 5 Republicans voted to advance the measure last week. That, combined with articles of impeachment introduced against DHS Secretary Kristi Noem and threats to hold the Clintons in criminal contempt of Congress, made it a busy day on the Hill. Congressional correspondent Lisa Desjardins has been covering all of this and more from the Capitol, where she joins me from now. Lisa, it's good to see you. So let's start with Venezuela. That big Senate vote today about blocking President Trump from using the military in or around the country without congressional approval. What do we need to know?
Right. That effort is now over. President Trump is unrebuked now because of Senate action today. What happened was Republican leaders found a workaround, essentially a procedural way that they could sidestep this vote altogether, a point of order. And they took a point of order by convincing other senators, other Republicans, that this vote was not in order in the means they were taking it because...
John here, sit down before I tell you this. Impeachment is a ghost that refuses to stay buried. Voted down, procedural delays, and silence won't kill it. As long as the president is in office, the ghost returns, each time louder and more organized. Right now, that ghost is rattling its chains again, and the force behind it is absolutely undeniable. This isn't just Democrats venting their frustrations on social media platforms. This isn't cable news talking heads working themselves into a frenzy for ratings. There is a genuine legal and constitutional battle happening right inside the halls of Congress. It connects Trump's previous impeachment trials like invisible threads, links directly to his actions in the Iran conflict, and ties into a Senate argument about blocked witnesses that traces all the way back to a Supreme Court ruling from 1893. Yes, you heard that correctly, 1893.
In their words, there is not a conflict that the U.S. has. The U.S. is not actively engaged in Venezuela right now. Effectively, what that did, Amna, was it gave those Republicans on the fence, some of them, a way out. So what happened was we had 2 Republicans flip their vote from last week to this. Let's take a look at who those are. Those are Republicans Josh Hawley of Missouri and Todd Young of Indiana. They supported this resolution overall, but today they voted to set it aside. There were still 3 Republicans who voted yes, though. Those were Susan Collins of Maine, Rand Paul of Kentucky, and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. So, Amna, what this means, as I say, is that the war powers remain completely intact for President Trump. He can use whatever military might he wants or not, but he knows that Congress is watching him. The other issue here is there really was no thorough debate, which is what those senators said they were fighting for.
All right, Lisa, take us to the House now. A major issue there, the expired Affordable Care Act subsidies. I know millions of people are watching this and tracking it. You spoke to senators involved in those talks. What did they tell you?
We are going to walk through every single piece of this puzzle. And by the time we reach the end, you will have a crystal clear understanding of exactly why this fight refuses to die and why it is becoming increasingly impossible for either political party to simply pretend it doesn't exist. The House Intelligence Committee is preparing to drop its report on the impeachment investigation, and that single act is going to shove this entire process into an entirely new gear. Once that report lands, the House Judiciary Committee takes over, and they are the ones who actually draft the articles of impeachment. The clock is ticking right now for the president to make his move, to decide whether he or his legal team will show up for the first Judiciary Committee hearing scheduled for Wednesday.
This will actually brief. Those talks right now are at a standstill. Those bipartisan senators, talking to them, they've agreed on some broad outlines of an extension, 2 years, with some more limitations, but mostly moderate limitations. But they've hit some hard walls, including debates over abortion policies. We'll be watching it closely, but right now, Amna, the truth is the path for extending these subsidies is getting narrower, and it may disappear in coming weeks.
We mentioned in the intro to this conversation talk of impeachment, but not for President Trump. Tell us about that.
Right. We're talking about Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. Today, Democrats led by Illinois Representative Robin Kelly filed articles of impeachment against her on several grounds, including that she has violated the public trust in the way she has put ICE officers around the country, in their words, violently acting against U.S. citizens. There are other articles of impeachment here as well. But the Homeland Security Department responded quickly, saying this is not legitimate, in their words. This is what a spokesman said precisely, said,
The president is currently in Florida, and the word coming out of his camp is that he has absolutely no intention of participating in what he calls the most ridiculous impeachment hearings in history. He fired off a tweet declaring that he will be representing the country in London at NATO instead, making it crystal clear that he views these proceedings as nothing more than a political circus designed to distract from his agenda. Let me paint you a picture so you can understand exactly where we stand in this moment. Throughout this year alone, multiple impeachment resolutions have been introduced in the House of Representatives against President Trump. The one that grabbed the most headlines came from Congressman Al Green of Texas, who dropped articles of impeachment back in the middle of the year.
How silly during a serious time as ICE officers are facing a 1,300% increase in assaults against them. Representative Kelly is more focused on showmanship and fundraising clicks. Representative Kelly, for her part, responded to that.
Secretary Noem, you have violated your oath of office, and there will be consequences. I am watching you. Members of Congress are watching you. The American people, most importantly, are watching you. And most of all, we are not liking what we're seeing. If you believe impeachment is silly, then you are not taking your job or our Constitution seriously.
This is privileged, so Representative Kelly can bring up that on the House floor anytime going forward.
And lastly, Lisa, we know House Republicans are preparing to take action against former President Bill Clinton and his wife, former Secretary Hillary Clinton. What should we know about that?
Quickly, this is from the House Oversight Chairman, James Comer. He said he will hold a vote next week on holding them in contempt because they have refused to testify behind closed doors despite the committee issuing a subpoena. This is related to the Epstein investigation, but former President Clinton said, no, he questions that. He says they are being held out among all those subpoenaed for sort of special treatment that he questions. And he also criticized the committee for not pushing hard enough to get out more of the actual Epstein documents from the Department of Justice. So we will keep watching this.
Busy day, as we said, on Capitol Hill. Lisa Desjardins covering it all, as always. Lisa, thank you.
Accusing Trump of completely bypassing Congress when he ordered military strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities. Green argued that this was a direct violation of the War Powers Clause buried in the Constitution. That part that explicitly says Congress holds the power to declare war, not the president acting alone. The resolution went down in flames. The House voted overwhelmingly to kill it, with 344 members saying no and only 79 saying yes. And here is the part that really gets under the skin of the anti-Trump crowd. A staggering 128 Democrats actually joined Republicans in tabling the measure. Even the top Democratic leaders voted present rather than yes, essentially refusing to take a side on the matter. Now, if you were just looking at that scoreboard, you might be tempted to conclude that impeachment is completely dead in the water. You might think nobody is taking this seriously anymore, and it's time to just move on and focus on other things. But that would be a massive misunderstanding of what is actually happening beneath the surface. Because in December, Congressman Green came roaring back with an entirely new set of articles of impeachment. This time, he focused on Trump's social media posts that called for the execution of Democratic lawmakers, along with Trump's consistent pattern of threatening federal judges who ruled against his administration's policies. The House voted again, and this time 140 members voted to advance the articles. That represented a significant jump from previous votes on similar measures. It wasn't enough to win, not by a long shot, but it was enough to demonstrate something absolutely crucial. The number is growing. The pressure is not fading away. It is actually intensifying. The push for accountability is not coming exclusively from the House either. Constitutional scholars, legal groups, and advocacy organizations held a formal symposium laying out the complete case for impeachment and removal. More than 300,000 Americans signed a petition demanding that Congress take action. Billboard campaigns started appearing near Mar-a-Lago and Palm Beach, making sure that the president could not miss the message, even when he was at his favorite retreat. These are not random protests that flare up and then fizzle out. This is an organized, sustained movement driven by people who genuinely believe that the constitutional machinery of accountability has not been properly utilized. They believe that the founders built mechanisms into the system specifically for situations like this, and they are determined to see those mechanisms actually put to work. But here is the part that most news coverage completely ignores, and it is arguably the most important piece of this entire puzzle. There is something called the missing witness rule, and it connects everything from Trump's first impeachment trial back in 2020 to the accountability debates happening right now in 2026. This is not some obscure legal loophole that some creative lawyer invented in a basement somewhere. This is a doctrine rooted in a Supreme Court decision from 1893, and Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island used it on the Senate floor during Trump's first impeachment trial to make a very specific and very powerful argument. He argued that when a president blocks witnesses from testifying, when he prevents his own officials from showing up and telling the truth under oath, the Senate has the legal right to assume the absolute worst. They get to assume that those hidden witnesses would have said something devastating to the president's defense. In other words, if you hide the witnesses, everyone gets to operate on the assumption that you were hiding something worth knowing. That argument did not simply evaporate when the Senate voted to acquit Trump. It was preserved on the official record, sitting there like a time bomb waiting to be detonated again. And now, as new accountability fights emerge around the Iran war, around threats to lawmakers, around court orders being defied, that argument is being dusted off and deployed once more. Let me slow this down and walk through it piece by piece, because the way this story gets told, particularly on social media platforms, is all emotion and absolutely no structure. People hear the word impeachment and they immediately either start cheering or rolling their eyes depending on which side of the aisle they sit on. What they almost never do is actually understand how the process works, why it keeps failing, and what it would actually take for it to ever succeed in the way the founders originally envisioned. So let us fix that right now. Starting from the very beginning, the first thing you need to understand is what impeachment actually is in the constitutional sense. It is not a criminal conviction. It is not a removal from office all by itself. Impeachment is the formal accusation, the equivalent of an indictment from a grand jury. The House votes to say, we believe this official has committed high crimes and misdemeanors, and then the case moves to the Senate for a full trial. It takes a 2/3 majority in the Senate to actually remove someone from office, which is an incredibly high bar to clear. Trump has been impeached twice, both times in the House, both times acquitted in the Senate. He was never removed from office. And both times the process ended the exact same way, with his critics arguing that the trial was rigged, witnesses were blocked, and justice was effectively denied to the American public. Now, fast forward to today, because here is what has fundamentally shifted in the political landscape. When Trump ordered military strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities without asking Congress for any authorization whatsoever, Congressman Al Green said that crossed a clear constitutional line. The Constitution gives Congress the power to declare war. It does not give the president the unilateral right to bomb another country and simply inform lawmakers about it afterward. And here is the detail that makes this situation even more extraordinary. Foreign heads of government were briefed before the American congressional leaders were told what was happening. That is not a minor procedural oversight. That is a profound breach of the relationship between the executive branch and the legislative branch. Green filed his articles of impeachment on those specific grounds, arguing that Trump abused the power of the presidency and violated the separation of powers doctrine that forms the very foundation of American government. The House voted to kill the resolution by a crushing margin. But underneath that headline, 79 members of the House voted yes on impeachment over the Iran war. That is not nothing. That is a defined and growing bloc inside the chamber. A group of lawmakers who are willing to put their names on the line and go on the record in favor of holding the president accountable. Then came December, and this is where the impeachment fight shifted to entirely different terrain. Green filed again, this time on two separate grounds. The first article covered Trump's social media posts calling for the execution of 6 Democratic lawmakers. sitting members of Congress who had also served in the military or in intelligence communities. Trump used language in all caps about seditious behavior punishable by death. He reposted content saying, "Hang them." He reposted content invoking George Washington. These were not vague, overheated comments that could be interpreted in multiple ways. They were targeted, specific, and directed at people currently serving in the United States Congress. The second article focused on Trump's pattern of threatening federal judges who had ruled against administration policies. Critics argued these posts were not just irresponsible, they were creating real physical danger for members of the judiciary and undermining the independence of the courts. The House voted to table the measure, but 140 votes in favor of advancing impeachment articles is a number that the political world absolutely has to take seriously. It was significantly higher than any prior vote on the same question, and it demonstrated that the momentum was building rather than fading away. Now, here's the legal layer that completely changes how you should understand this whole fight. When Senator Sheldon Whitehouse invoked the missing witness rule during Trump's first Senate impeachment trial, he was making an argument rooted in a Supreme Court case from 1893 called Graves versus the United States. The rule it established is direct and logical. If a party in a legal proceeding controls a witness, meaning that witness works for them, reports to them, and is within their power to produce, and that party chooses not to bring that witness forward, the court can assume the worst about why. The court can infer that the hidden witness would have said something that damaged the party who hid them. Whitehouse stood on the Senate floor and applied that doctrine to Trump's impeachment trial. He argued that Trump had blocked key White House officials from testifying: the acting chief of staff, senior budget officials, former national security advisors, people who had direct firsthand knowledge of the Ukraine aid situation at the center of the first impeachment. Trump instructed every single one of them not to appear, not to provide documents, and not to cooperate in any meaningful way. Whitehouse asked the House managers directly, given that the president has prevented all of these witnesses who are within his control from testifying, should the Senate apply the missing witness rule and draw an adverse inference about what they would have said? The House managers answered clearly. Senators were not only permitted to draw that inference, but absolutely should. The Senate still acquitted Trump, but the argument itself did not disappear when the vote was taken. It was preserved on the official record of the United States Senate. And it gets stronger every time a similar pattern emerges. Because here is the thing that critics of the administration keep pointing to. The pattern has not changed. The Iran war produced immediate demands from congressional leaders for intelligence briefings and explanations of the legal basis for military action without authorization. Those demands have been met with resistance. Oversight requests have been contested, and the people who made the missing witness argument are now applying the same logic to a completely new set of circumstances. They are saying, look at the pattern. Every time Congress asks questions that might be uncomfortable, the administration finds ways to limit what gets shared. And the missing witness rule says, you are allowed to notice that pattern. You are allowed to draw conclusions from it. Let me break this down into clean and clear pieces so you can understand what this impeachment fight is really about in the current moment. Not what the media says it is about, not what the social media hot takes claim, but the actual stakes. Who is using this fight, how they are using it, and what happens next. First and most importantly, impeachment right now is absolutely not about removal from office. Here is the political reality that almost nobody will say plainly on television. There is zero chance Trump gets removed from office in this Congress. Zero. The Senate requires a 2/3 majority to convict. Republicans control the Senate, and they are not going to vote to remove a president from their own party in the middle of his second term. Full stop. So if everyone already knows that, why do Democrats keep filing these articles? Why do constitutional scholars keep holding symposiums? Why do advocacy groups keep running billboards near Mar-a-Lago? Because the goal has fundamentally shifted. The goal is no longer conviction. The goal is documentation. Every time articles of impeachment go to the House floor, Every member of Congress is forced to cast a vote. Did you vote to advance impeachment over the Iran war? Did you vote to table it? Did you vote present so you could avoid the question entirely? All of that goes into the permanent official record. All of that gets used in campaign ads, in primary challenges, and in the midterm elections that are rapidly approaching. The accountability movement is not naive. They know they cannot remove Trump right now. What they are building is a documented official congressional record that says, here is what happened under this administration, here is what we tried to do about it, and here is exactly how every member of Congress responded when it mattered. That is a long game, and it is being played with real discipline and strategic patience. Second, the missing witness argument is gaining new traction in new situations. When White House raised that doctrine, he was talking about the Ukraine impeachment and the specific witnesses Trump blocked from testifying in that trial. But the principle he invoked is not limited to one impeachment. It applies every time an administration controls information that Congress or the public has a legitimate right to see and chooses to limit access to that information. The Iran war produced immediate demands from lawmakers for intelligence briefings, for legal justifications, for some accounting of why congressional leaders were informed after the strikes while foreign governments knew before. Those demands have not been fully satisfied. And critics are making the same argument White House made. If the administration keeps blocking the information that would allow proper oversight, Congress and the public are justified in assuming that information will be damaging. That is not just a political talking point. That is a documented legal principle with Supreme Court precedent behind it. And the people raising it know exactly what they are doing. They are establishing a pattern in the public record so that when oversight finally happens, whether through the courts, through a future Congress, or through history itself, the documentation already exists. Third, the war powers question is constitutionally unresolved and growing more significant by the day. When Trump ordered strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities without a congressional vote and without proper advance notification to congressional leadership, he was taking a position on executive power that a large number of constitutional lawyers consider legally questionable. The War Powers Clause is not ambiguous in its text. Congress declares war. That is what the Constitution says. Now, presidents from both parties have stretched and tested that clause for decades. This is not a fight that Trump started. Presidents have ordered military operations without full declarations of war for generations. But the Iran situation pushed into territory that genuinely concerned even some people who are not Trump critics. The scale of the operation was significant. The targets were nuclear facilities in a sovereign nation. The conflict stretched for months. Congressional leaders said they were not properly briefed before it started, even as foreign governments received advance notice. Bipartisan war powers resolutions were introduced in Congress to try to constrain the administration's ability to continue and escalate without legislative approval. Those resolutions faced steep opposition, but the fact that they attracted bipartisan support signals something important. This is not a purely partisan debate about constitutional authority. The question of whether the president had the legal power to start this war without Congress is real. It has not been settled by any court, and it is going to keep getting raised as long as the conflict continues and as long as oversight demands keep being resisted. Fourth and finally, the midterms are the real battlefield, and both sides know it with absolute certainty. Here is the piece that ties everything together and explains why this fight is so intense right now. Midterm elections are coming, and Democrats are in the minority in both the House and Senate. They cannot force anything through on their own. What they can do is make the case to voters that the upcoming election needs to produce a different Congress, one with the majority and the will to conduct real oversight. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer went on record predicting Republicans will follow Trump into the midterms and pay a heavy political price. He predicted Democrats will retake both chambers. That is an ambitious bet, but it reflects the strategy with total clarity. Make the election a referendum on accountability. Make every Republican who voted to table impeachment articles defend that vote to their constituents. Make every senator who voted to acquit Trump answer for what has happened since. The impeachment fight, even when it loses, feeds that strategy perfectly. It generates footage. It generates official votes on the record. It generates a story that can be told in advertising for the next year. And on the other side, Republicans are betting that voters care more about the economy, about gas prices, about security, about the Iran war being framed as strength rather than overreach. They are betting that impeachment talk makes Democrats look extreme rather than principled. Both bets are alive. Both sides believe they are right, and the midterms will be the final verdict. Here is the bottom line on all of it. Impeachment fights in the Trump era have never really been about the constitutional mechanism succeeding in the textbook way the founders designed it. They have been about something else entirely, about defining what kind of presidency this is, about forcing every member of Congress to choose a side on the record, and about building the political case for whatever comes next. The missing witness argument from 2020 was never answered. The war powers question raised by the Iran strikes is not settled. The accountability demands from 140 House members in December did not disappear when the vote was tabled. They accumulated on top of everything from January 6th, on top of everything from the Ukraine trial, on top of everything from the first 4 years. Layer after layer, document after document, vote after vote on the record. Whether all of that documentation eventually adds up to a political or legal consequence that actually changes something, that is the question nobody can honestly answer yet. But one thing is absolutely certain: the fight is not over. And the people driving it are more organized, more documented, and more patient than most of the media gives them credit for.